Lorna Gordon in Glasgow. What do the names Beatrice, Darcy, Teddy and Albert have in common? Well, they were all new entries in the top 100 most popular baby names of last year. Figures from the National Office of Statistics show that Oliver was the most popular boy's name in England and Wales in 2013, with nearly 7,000 babies given the name. Amelia topped the list for girls' names at almost 5,500. Popularity's a fickle thing, though. Thomas, the top boy's name 20 years ago, is still in the top 10 today, but Rebecca, the most popular girl's name back then, has disappeared completely from the top 100. The latest research also shows a few new names appearing with rather recognisable influences. Arya and Tyrion from Game of Thrones are gaining popularity, as are Walter and Skylar from the series Breaking Bad. There are also a few more unusual names for boys, with 3 babies being named Achilles and Ming. Whilst a big favourite from the 70s, Tracy, was used only 3 times this year. Eleanor Nickerson writes the blog BritishBabyNames.com. She gave me her thoughts on today's results.
I think what was interesting is that we really have a revival of the Edwardian name, so we can see that there's a real 4-generation rule going on now where people are really looking for the names of their great-grandparents. So we're seeing Beatrice and obviously Albert, but also names like Elsie and Violet and Ivy are making big leaps, and Teddy. So people are looking for names with a bit of history, but they're also looking for names that are no longer associated with sort of the grandparent generation. So 100-year rule is working really well at the moment.
I think you would have thought perhaps that George would have been further up the list, maybe, because of the Prince?
Yeah, well, it's actually really interesting when you look at the months breakdown, because actually George was in the top 10 from February to July, and then after Prince George was born, it actually dropped out of the top 10, which actually shows that George was more popular before he was born, and perhaps parents were slightly put off by the fact that the Prince was called George. Maybe they thought it was going to be too popular, so they chose something else instead.
What about regional differences? It's not the same across the country, is it?
No, actually. Although Amelia was the top girl's name across the board and Olivia was the second most popular across the board, but we find names like Scarlett is more popular up north. But boys, was quite a difference, actually. Oliver was top in 6 out of 10 regions, but Jack was more common in the east and the northeast, whereas Mohammed was more common in London and the West Midlands.
You mentioned names like Elsie and Violet. I suppose TV programmes like Downton Abbey must have an impact, don't they?
Yes, absolutely, and we see that Edith has actually made an impact, as you know, has moved up this year as well, and Carson last year, which is the butler's name, moved up. So I definitely think that the sort of costume dramas of Edwardian period are having that kind of influence.
Names can take a bit of a nosedive as well if they're associated with negative stories and events.
Yes, they can, and it's really hard to predict when a name is going to suddenly take a nosedive. Although, strangely enough, there were 40 girls named Reva last year, which was obviously when the case of Oscar Pistorius' girlfriend, who tragically died, was going on. So sometimes a negative news feature can have a positive effect on names sometimes.
It is more of an evolution, isn't it, than a revolution? I mean, it seems like Olivia has been around for about 15 years.
Yeah, it has, and particularly the names that are most popular, they tend to move more slowly. They gradually gain in popularity, and they tend to smoothly go down again in popularity, because I think once people have got their favourites, they become a sort of modern classic, and they stay with us for quite a while.
Baby names blogger Eleanor Nickerson.